Hello, everyone. Morning. I see everyone is streaming in. We're going to be creating some awesome renderings today, so it's going to be an exciting class. All right, so let me get my files ready. All right, there we go. Right, so last week, we kind of looked on the theory of rendering, and we used, we looked on the two different types of the two different technology behind rendering. Remember, we spoke about the real-time and the offline, and we compared two render engines. We compared Lumion and V-Ray. Lumion being the real-time engine. Lumion is pretty similar to Twinmotion. So we're going to be doing this rendering tutorial with Twinmotion because it's readily available and free for students. And we also ended on the note of what's a good ArcViz render workflow. And we learned that we should create the model, decide on the views to detail, so we don't detail everything, and then render the specific view. Now, in our case, we're doing a 360 animation, so we will have to render pretty much the whole thing. Now, we did talk a little bit about Twinmotion as well. We learned about how to download Twinmotion, which is from the website. I hope everybody has Twinmotion ready by now. And we did go into how do we connect Twinmotion to Revit. And we had just begun to do that. So now we're going to continue from where we left off, right? So, okay, so most of us should have our model, right? And in this case, this is my model. I have some windows, some doors, and it's maybe not exactly complete because this separately. Yeah, I have some windows and doors. It's not exactly complete, but it's still good enough for our purpose.
Sir, I have a question, sir.
Yeah.
Can the different groups or layers be transferred over to Lumion just the same as Twinmotion? So you can like select the roof plane and the whole thing that doesn't select as one?
That's a good question. I don't remember, but yes. No, I think the way how Lumion works, it works through materials. So you need to apply a different material in order to get that to register as a different material.
Because what I realized was I do the live thing with Lumion and Revit. So any movements or any changes I made, it made same time in Lumion. But it's just the material, everything is selected as one. So I definitely would have to like change up the materials in order to select them individually.
Exactly. Yeah. Plus there are other, for me in my book, for real-time rendering programs, Twinmotion for me has the edge. I mean, Lumion has some advantages, especially with I think the foliage look really good, the grass look really good and stuff like that. But Twinmotion has the edge because apart from it being a little bit more accessible program-wise, you can create objects in Twinmotion. I mean, not model really, but you have a bit more capabilities to manipulate the model, whereas Lumion is very much determined on the program that you're using. So that example was one example in terms of you having to add materials to the model and so forth. There are some other advantages that would benefit me in terms of the fact that I do 3D visualization for a living, why I also choose Twinmotion over Lumion or over Enscape. But we'll talk about that as we go along if we have some time. But right now we want to just kind of focus on this deep dive. I may move quite quickly, but there's always the recording that you can watch, because I want to try and get from beginning to end with this project, and hopefully we can go through all of the features of Twinmotion while we do that. Right? All right, so when we open up Twinmotion here, we're going to go to import, and this time we're going to use the direct link. So we had used that last time, and when we go to direct link, notice that it has the name of the Revit file that I have open. All right, so if I should put this side by side, it shows me that, you know, this file that's called 3D project that is what comes up here. Now, it's a good idea that when you're working with Lumia, when you're working between any real-time rendering program, it's a good idea to put everything for that program in a folder, right? So in this case, I'm going to call this checkpoint. No, I'm going to call this major project. And I'm going to save this Revit file, and I'm going to call it building model. All right. And the reason I'm saving it again is because you're using live link, you don't want to get this Revit file mixed up with the other files that you may have for any project you're working on. Right. So if you're working on your like studio project, and some persons might have a bunch of like files backed up, and then you have all of the backup files that Revit create. So you want to kind of separate out, when you're ready to do your renderings, you want to kind of separate out the definitive model in a folder by itself, and have everything that has to do with the rendering in a folder by itself, so you don't have any mix-ups, right? Okay, so I've saved that. Now, when I go over here, let me close this back here, and let me go here. Building model. All right. All right, I may have to, okay, let's just open back up Twinmotion here. So when you're doing the direct link, the name of the direct link should have the same name of the Revit file that you're using, right? So Revit shows you the name of the file here. It's called building model RVT. So when you open Twinmotion, you go to import and you choose direct link. It should open from that. So notice it's telling me that, you know, this is the name of the Revit file. So let me close this. Let me make sure to open the right model. Okay, so I called it building model here. All right. Okay, you see, so there it is. it says Revit building model. So you want to make sure that the direct link source is the same name as your Revit model, right? If it is not, then you need to do what I just did and just close it and open it back. Because we're using the direct link, you don't want, when you change it in one thing, it will update in the other. All right, so we're going to choose OK to import that. But before we do, we want to make sure that we are on keep hierarchy. So when you say keep hierarchy, it will keep the same object hierarchy as the program you are working with. So whether it is Revit or SketchUp or 3D Max, if you have an object in Revit like this roof, then when it comes over in Twinmotion, it will be an object by itself. So object for object, basically. Or you can do like what Lumion does and have it let it be object by material. So everything that has the same material will be one object. That may be helpful, especially if you're working on large projects. Maybe you have a multi-story building. You don't really want to have hundreds of objects. But in this case, in most cases, maybe keep hierarchy would be the option that you would choose. So we're going to choose import there. And if we wait a while, or if we look around, you'll notice that we don't see the model. And the reason for that is when we choose the link here, all we've really done is kind of plugged in the cable. But now you need to turn on the power switch. And to do that, you're going to head over to Datasmith tab in Revit, and then you're going to click the synchronize. That's right here. And once you click the synchronize, then it will send that data over. So if you look around, there is the model. Now, speaking of looking around, you will notice that Twinmotion, kind of just puts right front and center. How do you control it, right? So maybe the more straightforward, easy way to control Twinmotion, for those of you that are used to video games, is to use the ASWD to walk forward, back, strive left and right. And you hold the right mouse button to look around while moving. But for those of you who are not necessarily game players and you want to work like how you work in any regular architectural program, you can click this little gear here and set Twinmotion to work like how Revit works. So if I click that, then what you notice is that middle mouse button pans and shift and middle mouse button rotates. All right, so that's very similar to how Revit moves, right? So you click an object and then you hold shift and the middle mouse button, and then you're able to rotate around the center point of that object, which is exactly how it works in Revit. So that might help you guys out. All right, so now that we have the building linked over, we can start to add some materials. And well, the first thing you want to do, even before we start to add materials, is we want to save our file. Now, Twinmotion, you're going to want to save the Twinmotion file in the same folder that we're working in. So in this case, I'm going to save it in this major project folder. And I'm going to call this render scene 01. And the reason why I call it render scene 01 is because I want to I want to save progressively, right? You don't want to put all your eggs into one basket. So you're going to need to it's a good idea to continue to save and add like 01, 02, and so forth. So I'm going to choose OK there. All right. Now, of course, the ground is a little high, so I'm going to click on the ground here and I'm going to move it down. Now notice that this is my UCS, so I'm able, any object I click on, I'm able to move it based on the axis. I'm also able to rotate it as well, right? So if I was to click on this object, I'm able to rotate it there. Any object that I click on, you can know that it's highlighted because you can see this yellow highlight here, all right? All right. So that's how I know that I've clicked on this background here, because you can kind of see that highlight there in the background. All right. So let's get on to adding some materials to this object. We do have the site to import, but before we import the site, let us get through adding some materials here. Now, just a little bit about the interface. We have an arrow on the left here. We have an arrow on the right here. This arrow on the left takes us to our library. And let's magnify this. This arrow on the right shows us our scene outline. Now, the scene outline shows us all the objects in our scene. So if I click on this object here, we can see that this object here is this object, and this little eyeball here, I can turn it on and off and it will show that object there. Then notice that there are these little arrows that you see there, and what that is saying is that this object is a subset of that object. So this is like the parent for that. So for example, notice that everything down here is the child of this parent, which says building model. So for example, if I minimize building model, notice that everything minimizes, because all objects that make up this model fall underneath building model, and building model is the link that comes from Revit, right? So you can kind of track what is happening here with your scene outline right here, right? Okay, so let's add some materials. So to add materials, we're going to use our library window, which is over here. And you can see the different categories of things that we can add. So we can add materials here. And let's go to wood. Let's find something great. Maybe this ash here is great. And the way how you add materials in Twinmotion is that you're going to drag and drop the materials. Now, this is the first thing you're going to notice what happened. When I drag and drop this material here, you notice that the entire building gets this material, which in most cases is going to be a bad thing, right? And not only did it get the material, but the scale of the material looks a little weird, right? So I'm going to undo that by doing Control Z. And now we're going to start to look into some of these icons that we're seeing here, all right? Now, this icon is going to be the culprit that is responsible for that effect. Because what this is saying is that, hey, any material that is similar, which was applied from Revit, is going to mirror whatever material is applied. So for example, in Revit, most of these materials are all the default materials. So it's like they're the same thing. They're all default materials. So this is why when you go in Twinmotion, everything is the same. Because what Twinmotion is saying that, hey, if this material is the same as this material, is the same as this material, is the same as this material, then when you drag a material to any one of these, I assume that you want all of these to be the same, which in this case is not. So to change that, what you're going to do is you're going to click and hold this, and you're going to change this to apply to object. And that way, when you drag this material here, it will only apply to just the object. So that solves one problem, but the next problem is going to be that, well, obviously this material looks kind of weird. You can kind of zoom in here. You can see that this texture is going that way and this texture is going that way. And the reason it's doing this is just because of how it was modeled in the program that it's coming from, right? The DCC program, right? Which is the digital content creation program. And in this case, that would be coming from Revit. Now, there's a way to override this, and we're going to undo that again. And that would be what this icon is responsible for. Now, this icon is responsible for how the texture wraps around an object, right? So a good way to kind of explain this is if I should get a primitive, so I'm going to just show you an example here. If I should just drop this box that's here and I go to materials, let's go to wood and let me just drag average one here. Notice that how this is applied is that this is a face and the wood is applied to that, then this is also a face here and so forth. Now, if I change this to say cylinder and I drag this here, or sphere and drag this, well, it's not showing on this particular part, but if I change this to cylinder here and I drag this material here, you're going to notice that, okay, that looks a little weird. Let's undo that again. If I change it to, so you can see the name, if I change it to from object UV, well, it looks like that. If I change it to cylindrical, it looks like that. So clearly you can see that this object here, this button here controls how the texture is applied to the object, right? So in this case, we're going to use the cubic version here, because when you use the from object UV, it is basically saying that however Revit intended the textures to be mapped, then Twinmotion is going to interpret that rule and obey it. And in this case, when we try to add our material here, well, this is what it was obeying, and obviously we don't want it to be applied this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to change it to cubic and then apply it now, and then you can see that it is applied correctly. Now, point to note, whenever you drag the material onto an object, you will notice that the settings that we see down here will change, right? Now, our material options here is related to the material that's currently selected here, right? So for example, we can change the color, the reflection, the scale of the material, and a host of other settings. And it's based on the material that we have currently selected. Now, every time we add a material, we drag it from here, a new material is added to our library here, right? And so far, if you notice, you see this little check mark here beside this material. Well, these check marks are telling you that these materials have been used in the scene. So we've used this one and we've used this one, right? Now, we also have this plus button here, and this means that we want to add a new material. Then we also have this button here, which kind of lets us zoom in to see what the material looks like. All right, so we can switch between that and our material library, or just zoom in on this material. Now, it's a good practice that all materials that you use, you give it a name, because it's just going to have the default name from the library, and it's going to be hard for you to kind of keep track of all the materials because they have the same library name, right? So I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this wall siding. Yeah, let's call it that. All right, so with this rule selected in the way that the material is applied, I'm going to apply the wall there. I'm going to apply that material here. And I'm going to apply it here, right? So the great thing about this is because I've applied the wall siding material here, if I want to change the scale of this, notice that all the materials change because I've applied the wall siding material to everything. All right, good stuff. Now let's start to get into some little tricks that may affect you when you are applying your material, right? So in this case, when I'm trying to apply material to my window, let's say that I want this window to be aluminum. So let's go back to materials, and aluminum would be a metal and brushed aluminum. Now, when I drag the brushed aluminum, notice that I'm not able to apply to these individual elements. Everything is getting the aluminum, even though I've selected the option to only apply to a single object. Now, this is a challenge that you will meet up on probably a lot, depending on how the building was modeled. So if I go back into Revit here, and we look at how this window was modeled here, let's open back that file. All right, so while we have this done, we need to solve this issue, which is a very common issue because all of this is reading as one object. So when you go into Revit and we look here, we can see that all of this is an object. Now, I'm hoping that we remember about groups in Revit, because in my model, this is a group, and this is a group, and this is a group. So that would mean that anything I do to one group will do to the rest, all right? And if I edit this group, then I'll realize that I have one big editing place here. So that means that when I was doing an editing place to create these windows, I just built the louvers, the window, and just built everything one time. You know, maybe because I was trying to take a shortcut, but now it has kind of come back and bite me in the butt, because now all of this is reading as one object instead of reading as different objects here. All right, so this element here is a group, and if I go to edit group, you'll notice that all of this was built as one editing place, which is a bad thing, because now I'm not able to have the louvers different from the frames, different from the glass. And in Twinmotion, everything is reading as one object. So now we have to kind of correct this. Well, I have to kind of correct this. Now, a good way that I can do this in the shortest way possible is, what I need is, I need an object. I need to have the window frames, the window panel being one object. I need to have the louvers being a second object, and then I need to have the frames being a third object. Now, how I can do that is that I can duplicate this entire window. I can duplicate it 3 times. And in the first copy, I will delete the frames and delete the panels and just leave the louvers. And then in the second copy, I will delete the louvers and the frame and just leave the panels, and the third copy I'll just leave the frames alone. So that's what I'm doing. I'm copying and then deleting what I don't need for each tree. Now, the great thing about this is that because I did this in a group, thank goodness, when I do it to one, it will also do to all of the windows. So that is a great benefit of using groups in Revit. So to duplicate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the copy button. That's right here. And then I'm going to hit the paste, and I'm going to say paste to same place. So I've just copied it right over itself, and I'm going to do the same. I'm going to do the same thing again, copy and paste the same place, right? So I've now made 3 copies of the windows, and I mean, you're not really seeing it here, but if I should select them and look on my filter, you will see that I have 3 copies, right? So what I'm going to do in my first copy, I'm going to go edit in place, and in this first copy, I only want to have the louvers. So I'm going to delete the frame, I'm going to delete the panels, and just leave the louvers, and I'm going to click finish. Then I'm going to go to my next copy and go to edit in place, and this time I'm going to delete the panels. Of course, you're not going to see it delete because remember that I copied this whole thing 3 times, right? So then I'm going to delete the frames and just leave the panels. And then in the last version, I have to kind of just find it, that one. I'm going to delete the panels, and I'm going to delete the louvers, and then I'm just going to leave the frame. So now I have kind of got myself out of trouble and got away with now having louvers different from panels, different from frames. I'm just going to click finish. And then when I click finish, notice Revit is going to be doing all sorts of stuff here because this is multiplied by 3 times. So now I have all 3 of these. And now all I need to do is I need to just go over to Datasmith and go to synchronize. And then all that data is transferred over here. Now I can know that it's transferred because check it out. These louvers are different objects from these frames, from these panels, from these frames. So now they work. And the good thing is that if I go around here, the same thing is repeated because in Revit, I made it a group. So that is good news. Now I do also have to fix that with the doors as well, because unfortunately with the doors, what I did is I just grouped the doors along with the louvers. But now I want the louvers to have a different material than the door. I mean, you don't have to, but depends on what is your preference. So let's see how that works out, right? So if I go to my materials over here, and I go to materials here, and I go to wood, and let's find a wood material that's a little different. How about the mahogany? That doesn't look bad, but these doors are looking kind of weird because one material is this way and the other one is this way. So that's just a recipe for trouble. So in Revit, what I'm going to do is delete this door. And I'm going to just copy this door. Oops, I think I missed here. Let's do that again. There we go. And then I'm going to synchronize. So you see that the synchronize makes the process so easier. So you don't have to keep exporting each time. And of course, this door is, going to be blank. before I apply this here, what I want to do is I want to name this. This is a good idea to always name your material. So I'm going to call this door. Drag it over here and voila. These doors are looking great. Oh, of course, these got applied to it because I have this option selected here. I had closed Twinmotion and open it back. That's why that happened. So let me undo. Well, I don't have to undo. I can just change it back to single. And oh, actually, I need to undo because it changed everything to that material. So let's just. Can I even undo that? I did that so long ago. Oh, undo. Oh, I don't have any more undos. Well, okay, that's fine. I can always correct that afterwards. So yeah, that's fine. All right, so let's give the windows a color. So a material. So I'm going to go to glass and I'm going to go to two-sided glass. There it goes. I'm going to also name it. So I'm going to call this Windows. And I'm going to apply this to the back as well as to here. Now remember the importance of doing this, because now that I've done this, I can always go into my glass material and change the opacity, and all of them will change at once because I named it and applied it. All right, so let's change this color to like something dark so it looks a little tinted. Then I don't know, I'm kind of loving these mahogany frames. Let's see how the frames work out. Yeah, I think those frames are looking pretty good. All right, now we also have some frames here. Well, this is definitely going to be glass up top. We're going to be changing the opacity of this glass to make it more opaque, right? Then let's talk about these members here. We could, let's see if we can find another material so that we have a bit, it's a bit diverse, different types of wood. So we use the ash. Let's try the oak. Okay, that's not looking bad. That's not looking bad. Let's try the oak here. Well, we kind of have a problem here because this oak should be heading in that direction because the grain is going vertical. So it looks a little weird. So we're going to rename this oak and we're going to call this frame vertical, and then we're going to duplicate this material and then call the other one, and to rename this and call it frame horizontal. So I'm going to apply the horizontal frame to here. Of course, it's not going horizontal now, but what I can do is I can go into the properties in scale. More importantly, go to more under scale, and I can change the rotation of that, right? So I'm going to change this to like 90. So now we can see that the wood is going in that direction, which gives a whole nice realistic theme. Let's make the scale of it a little bigger. So let's go back and change the scale so that it's a little bigger. So we can kind of see the texture in the wood. And then let's click on vertical and oak vertical, and then we're going to make that big as well. So that's looking pretty nice. All right, so well, what we have here is some Z fighting, and the reason for that is that we have multiple surfaces on each other. So let's see how we're going to deal with this. Let's add the frame horizontal to this member here. And I think we spot the problem here the frame is going inside the wood here. So now that is something we're going to have to fix in Revit. So we're going to go back to Revit and let's see if we can resolve this. Here is the culprit. So we need to edit this. So let's switch to hidden line so that we can kind of see this a little better. So that's our problem there. So let's go to edit in place. And we're going to go to edit extrusion. And well, we need to do some. So we're going to align this here. And then the distance here is 25 millimeters. So we're going to offset this by 25. There we go. Then we need to delete this top line here and then we're going to trim it up. So we're going to connect this to that and connect that to that. Oops. I think I've lost my view. There we go. And then we're going to connect this to that and that to there. All right, so we've fixed that little issue. We still have this member going inside of this, but if they're the same material, it doesn't matter. So let's go to Datasmith and synchronize. Let's go back over to Twinmotion and voila, it's all fixed. We do still have some Z fight in here, but because it's the same material, you don't see it that much. Let's see, what color should we put the frame in? Well, I'm thinking let's try out a black frame, right? So let's go to metal. We could try out aluminum. Let's see what aluminum looks like. It's not looking bad, but I think I want a dark aluminum. I think that would be better. So, all right, what I'm going to do is rename this and call it frame. Call it metal frames. And then I'm going to change the color to something nice and dark like that. So that looks, I think that looks a little nicer. So I'm going to apply the frames to here and apply it to here. That's looking better. All right, now to deal with these rafters. The sun is kind of getting in the way, so we can adjust our sun angle a number of ways. Perhaps the quickest way to adjust the sun is we can go to the little eye here, and then we can go to time of day, and we can kind of change that a little bit. So yeah, I don't know if that's better, but all right, let's deal with these rafters now. So let's use the same material we did here. Now, just in case I may forget what material I use for this here, I can now use this tool now, the pipette tool, to sample the material. So I can click this and then Twinmotion will show me what material. You can notice that it has the little white box around it. So that is, it's telling me that, hey, this is frame horizontal. And what I want to do is I want to apply frame horizontal to this here. But we kind of have an issue dealing with, when we look, we can see that the grain is going horizontal. Actually, we have the bump is going vertical and the grain is going horizontal. So we need to fix that issue. So let's fix that first. You can kind of see they're fighting. So let's go into this material. Let's go into settings. Let's go into bump. Yeah, and let's go into more. And well, I don't think we can rotate that, so I guess that has to remain. Oh well, but the texture is going in the right direction, so that's what matters. But we do have a challenge here because this looks a little weird because the texture is kind of going not in the direction of the wood. So we need to duplicate this material, and then we're going to rename this one. We're going to call it frame joist and apply this here. And then we're going to go into scale, and we're going to rotate this 10. Yeah, that's looking a bit better. So now it's going in the direction of the member there. So that's good. So now I just need to apply this to each of these. All right, and of course this is supposed to be glass, so let's apply the glass material there. That's looking good. All right. Oh, here is one more member here. So let's apply the frame joist. Let's apply the frames to the glass here. Frames there. All right. And oh, well, let's deal with down here. So let's use a different wood for the base. Let's find something that's a little bit rugged. Like, what about this oak? Oh, we use oak for the front already. What about this one here? This one here is lighter, and this one here is cedar. Chestnut. No, that's a bit dark. Ash. Okay, let's try the ash. Now, obviously, the ash is going in the wrong direction and it's too small. So let's go to scale, and we're going to rotate that 90 degrees. Then we are going to go back and we're going to scale this up. There we go. That's looking nice. Actually, this is the same material as the sides. We could use something different to change it up a bit. So let's try the oak. So we have a different material. So we're gonna have to do the same thing. Oops. Let's rotate it 90 degrees and let's scale it up. Yeah, that's looking better. That's looking better. Let's do this bottom part now. So we can do, all right, so let's rename this. Let's call this floor joist, floor J for short. That's looking good. Let's add another material here to kind of change it up a bit. Let's try chestnut. All right, let's scale it up and let's rotate it. Yeah, give it some variety, so it shows. So yeah, that's good. So, well, this is no longer this is the floor joist. So we're gonna call this, I think I'm running out of names now. So let's call this foundation joist. H for horizontal, because if we apply this here, then we're going to get this weird horizontal wood, and that's looking weird. So we're going to duplicate this, and then we're going to rename this and call this one now vertical, and then we're going to rotate it or unrotate it and then apply it there. So now we have this, we have the wood going in the correct direction. So, these little things help to bring your visualization to the next level. And we're going to apply it all the way here because we're going to do a animation. So we want to have the camera is going to go all around. So we want to do it. We want to make sure the detail is shown. All right, good stuff. Good stuff. I think the doors are looking a bit dark though. Maybe I want to use a different wood for this, maybe to lighten it up. So let's go with, let's try the ash for the doors. Yeah, that kind of lightens it up a bit. Let's rename it. And let's call it Doors Ash, because I think we had another material called Door already. And let's scale that up. Yeah, I think that's looking better. It was a bit dark there. And let's add the windows are fine. All right, great. So we have pretty much add materials to the building. Hold on, we're not finished. We need the roof. So let's go to we do have roof material, I believe. Yep, roof coverings. And let's add this roof covering here. That's a bit small, but of course, we have a problem because we have this roof material underneath. So let's go back to Revit and correct that. I'm thinking the quickest way we can do this is maybe to go to like a side view. Let's switch to hidden line. And let's duplicate this roof. So I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste the roof in place. And then check this out. What I'm going to do is move one of them halfway and move the other one, if I can get to select it, halfway down. So now we have like two roofs. We have an under cover, and then we have the roof material. So I'm going to synchronize that. And then I'm going to reapply the material to the roof. Oh, and I definitely need to scale that material because it's so small. So scale it up. And then let's use one of these materials, maybe floor joists. Yeah, that's looking nice. All right. So now I believe where is our wall material? So you see we're having a whole bunch of material now, but we named the material so it's easy for me to find it. Oh, we do need to add a floor material here. So let's find something in wood. Let's get something really rough, like rough planks. Obviously that's too small. Let's make it bigger. It's looking a little weird. I think because it's repeating, I think we need to scale it. Now we need to go into axis and scale it on one axis, it seems. Let's stretch it on the X. Okay, no, that's not the problem. This is the problem. I don't know. That looks a little weird. Let's find something else. Old planks. The scale is small. Well, it definitely needs to be rotated. So let's rotate it by 90 degrees. Still not looking right. There are planks here, I believe. Yeah, there's wood siding, and there is floor, mahogany. That's yeah, I think this works out a little better. Yeah, I think this works out a little better. And I think I know the problem here. The problem is that is how the material is being applied. So whenever you're getting any weird application of materials, just change this to like cubic. Let's go back and try that rough planks. And there we go. That's looking much nicer. Let's rotate this. There we go. So that was our problem there. All right. So with that said, I think we have managed to apply materials to the building. All right. So now would be a good time to save as, and we're going to save this as 03. Okay. So now that we have the building all done, the next thing we're going to do is let's start to think about the site. All right. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Would it be best you add the
So let us open the site Revit file now and see what that looks like. Do we want to save? Yes, we do want to save, but not yet. Now, here's another important thing about saving, right? When I'm in the building file, I'm not able to save progressively, right? Because Revit is looking for a file called building model. So if I save this as a building model 02, then the synchronization is not going to work because Revit is going to say, I can't find a file called building model 02. So in this case, I need to just save normally, right? Remember, saving does not update your Revit model. You have to synchronize, which is different from saving. All right, so let's head over to the site now. Whoops, I closed it by mistake. And with the site file, things are going to go a little bit differently because in Twinmotion we have we can have a plane that could be used for the water, so we don't have to carry over our water plane. So I'm going to delete that, but we definitely want our terrain, and everybody might have different terrains. Like this is a very simple kind of terrain here, but some persons might have more complex terrain that you might want to use. And there's actually a little trick in working with terrain, right? And it's not really a trick, it's kind of a bonus tip, right? And I want you to watch closely as I'm going to show you some tips in how you can get more out of your terrain in Lumion, in Twinmotion. So what we're going to do is we are going to go over to Twinmotion, and we're going to go over to our import, and we're going to add a new import. And of course, the direct link that we're going to use here has already detected that we have a file called Revit site model. And we're going to say great, and we're going to do the same thing, keep hierarchy, and choose import. Of course, we're not going to see an import because we have to go over to Revit and say synchronize. Now, once we do that, we can see our terrain comes over, well, nicely, somewhat. Now, as we're on the topic of terrain, let us get rid of this base because we don't need it, and let's talk a little bit about the background, since we're starting to go into the environment of things, right? So so in terms of editing the background, what we need to go to is settings, and then we need to go to location, because it's the location that's kind of determining what's been shown for the background. So, and we're going to say background, and we're going to say, let's change it to countryside. That looks kind of okay. Or we could change to none if that's fine. It's up to you. All right, so let's go back to our site now. And we could move the site down a little bit. So we're going to move this down. All right, so the idea is that we are hoping that the site is big enough, which is why when we were creating the terrain, we made the terrain much bigger than the building. Let's carry this over a little bit. Oops. So that the building doesn't appear to be floating. So you definitely want the site to be way bigger than the terrain, right? Now, Twinmotion has some very interesting site tools, but when we utilize a mesh coming from a different program, we cannot take advantage of these tools, right? So for example, when we carry this mesh, yes, we are able to add materials. We could go to materials and go to ground, nature, and we could add grass. We could always scale it up. And, there we go. We have some grass. However, there is so much more that can be done to the terrain that if I am, what I would suggest when you want to have terrain in your renderings, especially if it has contours, is there's a little trick that you can do, right? So in order to show you how this works, let's say that this was I'm going to undo. So this was the default material here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to import, and this time around in Revit, I am going to export my site as an FBX file, right? Watch this one very carefully, because this is a little tip. And I'm going to go to the same working folder. So I'm going to go to major project, and I'm going to save this as site mesh. Then in Twinmotion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to library, vegetation and landscapes. Actually, no. I'm going to go to import landscapes, and then I'm going to go to open, and then I'm going to browse for that file. That file that we were using. And here it is, the site mesh file that I exported. I'm going to open this. I'm going to leave everything pretty much at default and choose import. Now you're going to see a mesh come in, and it's going to look a little different, but there are some major advantages that's happening here. Now this mesh that you see here, what Revit is doing is it used this mesh here and generated a additional landscape mesh, which gives us all the features of landscaping, which we're going to see in just a bit. And it gives us it with the same terrain height levels as the original mesh. So all we have to do now is to kind of line this up. And to line this up, I'm going to go to my top view. I'm going to go to views and go to top. And it's going to look a little weird, but that's okay because all we need to do is to line it up. So I'm going to carry this over here and I'm going to rotate this way. And I'm going to kind of just get it right like that. Let's go back to perspective view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the height slightly so that it can kind of match the original mesh. It's not going to be perfect, but that's fine, guys. That's perfectly fine. So notice it has the same slope, but it's a little different. So Twinmotion didn't like interpret it like pixel for polygon for polygon, but it gives the rough approximation. And that is more than good enough for us. Now what we're going to do, we're going to delete the original mesh. And then we're left with this mesh now. And this mesh has way more options that we can now utilize. So we're going to just position this as how we want. Now notice, and when we select this mesh, we have some options here. And this is the reason why we did it this way, because now we're able to sculpt this model a little bit more. So for example, we can go to the sculpt tool and notice you see this little brush here, and we're going to make it a little bit larger. Oh, that's too big. And we can start to kind of raise certain levels here. Let's make it a bit bigger. So we can kind of raise this up here. Can raise this again. And we can choose like the strength, so the intensity. Make it very intense, part of it. We can also like flatten off certain areas. So notice we get a little edge here. But notice what is happening here is that we have some stones that's starting to appear here. And this is another one of the major advantages with using the landscape tool, because we can paint the terrain. And when we go to paint the terrain, we notice that we get 4 layers, and they're in order of how they will appear. So the grass is the base layer and the stone is the top layer. So for example, let's say that I wanted to paint in some gravel, and I could just like kind of paint that in around the building like that. And if I maybe painted too much, I can just switch back to the grass and I can just kind of erase it like that. And if I want to do like a little path, I can like, I could make this a little smaller, and then I could do like a path like that. And then I can go back to my sculpt tool and I can match that path with a, I can make it a negative. So I can, well, obviously that's too deep. So we want to carry the intensity all the way down. So we can kind of have it like that. So then we're kind of having a path that leads here. Now, the other great thing about this is let's add our water to this. So to add water, we can add water in one or two ways. We could go to our library and we could go to tools and go to not tools, we could go to objects and then go to primitives and then add a circle base. Let's add it out here. And let's put it like that. Then we could go to our tools here and go to scale. And we can scale this like much bigger. Zoom out here. bigger like that. Oh, I think it's lean. So we need to straighten it a bit. So we need to okay, what we need to do here is okay. Let's do this again. Let's add the circle, but we want to add it. We don't want this circle to be lean. That's the thing. So we want to kind of add it out here. I think this is straight now. This should be straight. All right. So let's go to our scale tool, which is here. By default, we only get the move tool. Usually that's the default, but then you need to click this little arrow that's right here in order to expand that to get the scale tool. So we're going to scale this up. Scale it up. There we go. Now that's flat. Let's go to the move tool and to move this down. So this kind of represents our water right there. So that could be our water right there. So we could carry this up some more, like about that. And of course, we could go to library and materials and water. And we could try lake water. There we go. And there we have our water. So that is one way that we could add water to our scene. Now there's another way that we can add water. We can actually add an ocean, because as you realize that this water has a limit, like, you know, it's only like that big. So there's a limit to this water, but we can get a much larger water that kind of spans to the horizon if we wanted to do that. So let's show you how I do that. So I can go to the scene tool here and I can hide this water for now. So to do the ocean, I need to go to my settings. I'll go to not weather, but location, background. I can never remember where this is. I think it's weather. Yes. So I go to weather, effects, ocean, and then I just need to turn on the ocean. So if you look now, the ocean goes all the way to the horizon and you're like surrounded by water here. And you can set the height of the ocean here. Try -5. Nope. -4.2. -4. 5. -3. -2. 1. Yeah, that's good enough. The great thing about water is that when you go underneath, you kind of get this underwater vibe. You know, everything is wobbly. And check this out. When you come above water, you see like little water running down the window. So your camera. So that's pretty cool. All right. So that is pretty much it. Now, the thing about it though, the ocean water is like you can't really change, because it's not really an object that you can manipulate. It's like, you know, you can't really change the ocean water. You can't really change the material. So I'm not a big fan of that. So we're not going to be using the ocean water, but for those of you who want to use it, you can go ahead. But I'm just going to go to weather effects and I'm going to go to ocean and I'm going to switch it off. And I'm going to put back my circle where I have a bit more control. I can change the materials. You know, I can have different water effects. So I want to keep this type because I just have a bit more control over it. All right, so now that we've added the terrain and we kind of learned that trick with adding the terrain, if I wanted to add like some rocks on the edge of here, well, I'll click on the terrain. Site mesh. Right, so I need to click on the site mesh. I can go to paint and I can choose rocks, and I can maybe make this diameter a bit smaller, and I can now paint some rocks in on the side of this here. All right, so I'm getting that in my background like that. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is to start to talk about like vegetation, since we're on the environment. So we're going to go on the vegetation, and there are basically two types of vegetations. You can think of vegetation as maybe like trees that you can place individually. So for example, I could place a tree here by just dragging it out and kind of sticking it there, and I can change like the height. And I can change like the size of the tree by scaling it down. But a much shorter way to do this is to go to settings and use the context and use the paint vegetation tool, and just drag in a bunch of trees that you want to paint. So let's get these shrubs. Let's say I want to paint this and this short tree here. Maybe I want to paint some palm trees, plum tree, Mexican lime, birch, and all of these trees here, when I go to my paintbrush tool, it will randomize between these trees, right? So notice that I'm painting these here. I can kind of change the diameter to include more. And it's just a bit easier for me to now paint these trees in. Maybe I should, I can change the density of these. So make it more. I could make the Mexican lime be more or less. There we go. So usually we do this to kind of lay down the foundation. So meaning the background context. There we go. Maybe not so much. Let me delete these. And then what you would do, all right, that one, let's go here. Let's put back some trees here. Then after you do this, what you would do now is you'd go in and now manually place some trees in the locations that you want. So for example, you can now go in manually and like so let's go to bushes and let's try some of these. And what I'm doing is kind of placing them randomly. Now, some tips when we're doing this is you want to kind of dress up the bases and wherever mesh translates. So for example, notice how the ocean changes to the edge of the land. You want to put some things there to help with that transition. So I'm going to put some of these first, and then I'm going to maybe place some additional here. Now notice that I'm manually placing these. I'm not painting them because you just paint the kind of general trees, and then you kind of go in now with more specific placement of trees and plants. So kind of just picking some here. There we go. Just kind of stick that there. And I'm only going to kind of dress up the areas that we are currently using. That's going to be in view. Now let's get some rocks. So we could paint some rocks. Anything that you need to apply in bulk, always lay down a base layer with painting first. So let's delete these paint samples here, and let's add some rocks to paint. And we're going to definitely going to make this smaller, and then probably paint some rocks. Oops, I think I made an error there. I changed the trees to rocks. Right, so you can actually swap these out. If you have that group of trees selected like this, you can actually swap them out. So I had it selected before, so I need to deselect it, and then I need to create a new paint group. So I go to vegetation paint, and now I add the rocks. So I'm going to add some rocks here, and then I'm going to paint these rocks. Perhaps like that. Maybe I'll paint some along the pathway. I mean, you can really spend a lot of time like doing these landscape elements. All right, so once the kind of foundation is there, then you would go in and manually place some additional rocks here. So maybe get a big boulder here, and I'll just stick one there, and maybe stick one there, and maybe here. What I'm trying to do is to kind of obscure the edge of this here to not make it so sharp, you know. What I can also do is click back on my terrain here, and I go to my paint. I could paint some sand to the edge, some gravel. There we go. And then perhaps the last touch now would be some grass. So I would go to I'll go back to context and vegetation. By the way, let me save, because we don't want this to crash on us. So we're gonna save 04. Okay, so this time around we're gonna go to detail grass, and let's go for maybe this grass here. Oh, sorry, we need to go to vegetation, grass and flowers, and then pick the grass that we want to use. So let's choose the weeds first, and we can just kind of lay down a layer of weeds here. You can kind of see them there. There they are. Lay down a layer here. And this is where most of the Twinmotion shines in terms of its adding landscapes. All right, let's add another one here. And this time let's add some taller grass. Well, tall grass. We're going to paint it. So there we go. All right. It's looking kind of okay. Let's leave that for now. All right, so there are maybe some more elements we could add in the background. The trees are looking a bit scarce, but from this general idea, you get the you could spend hours just doing landscaping alone here. So what I do want to introduce to you though, which is an advantage of using the Twinmotion online, is that you can actually you actually have some additional categories such as mega scans and Sketchfab, and these are additional libraries that you have access to. But in order to get to them, you would need to sign in to Epic Games here. So I'm going to sign in. So I'm signed in here with my username. So I'm able to go to Quixel. I don't know. Let's go to plants. Let's use. Let's see. There are so much here. Let's go to garden plants. Maybe flooring. And then you will see all of these plants right here. And you can actually drag this in. It should come in just fine. Where did you go? Oh, I don't think. Okay, let's add another one. Fern. Oh, you need to download it first. That's why. So I need to hit the download button. And then I need to choose which one I want. So let's choose this one. And then I'm going to drag it out. So these are some other categories, and these plants are like really high detail. All right. And they're like blowing in the wind and everything. So that's one category you can check out. So that is the Quixel Mega Scans. For the Sketchfab category, this has just totally random stuff in there. So for example, let's see, nature. There's so much here. There's like rocks and skeletons and big gray rock. Let's download this, see what this looks like. Now you have to be on the internet for these elements to work. So, okay, I guess that's what it looks like. So, I don't know, we could like, let's put this over here. We can drop this in the water and maybe just scale it up a bit. This huge rock. Let's have it there in the water. Now, of course, there are objects that you can add. So for example, we can go to objects and vehicles, boats, and we could add like a nice little boat here, inflatable boat. So we could just add that there. We could like carry it maybe like right here. So that seems pretty perfect. And we can probably put another boat out on the water like that. And as it relates to other entourage, such as vehicles and two-wheel bikes, of course, these are all elements that you can add. I think there is also, you could probably add a bike and all of these things. All right. And of course, there are characters that you can add, and you can either add posed humans. That's great for images. So for example, casual persons, maybe add a person here. There we go. We could probably add more than one person so it looks like they're having a conversation. So we could probably add somebody here. All right, so that's just a little bit of an example of how you can start to populate your scene there. And you can see the scene is really starting to come alive. All right. Okay, now once you have your building set up, your environment set up, then the final component is going to have to do with rendering, right? And if you remember how we deal with rendering or the technologies behind rendering, remember we spoke about real-time and offline rendering. And we know that real-time rendering is what we're experiencing now, meaning what you're seeing now is what you get. Like you can literally click the little eyeball here and just say where is it? Oh, take a screenshot. And that is your rendering. And I could like stick this in a presentation. So literally recording the screen is what is called real-time rendering. Now, it's important to note that most real-time applications, including even Lumion, Twinmotion, and Enscape, what you see in the viewport is going to be a little different than what you capture for rendering an image. As a matter of fact, when you capture an image, it will look a little bit better than what you see in the viewport, right? And that's because the viewport is kind of optimized so that you can move around and everything can be nice and smooth and easy to manipulate, right? So with Twinmotion though, there is something important that you have to decide on with Twinmotion, and it's two workflows. Now, even though Twinmotion is a real-time application, when it comes to rendering, you have to choose whether you're going to use a real-time rendering pipeline or you're going to use a what you call it now, hybrid offline rendering pipeline. And what do I mean by that? Well, the real-time component is like what I'm seeing here, but Twinmotion has the ability to use what's called a path tracer tool, which is using technologies that offline renderers use to get more accurate representation of your rendering, right? But the thing about this is you have to choose which one you plan to use. Real time means that, you know, everything is moving in real time like a game. But the path tracer looks a little different. Like this is a path trace scene. And if I move around, you can kind of see where it looks very hazy. And then when you release the mouse, it kind of clears up a little. Now, there are a couple of things that are different. Like some of the trees look different. The water definitely looks different. And the shadows look different. As a matter of fact, if you look, you can see that the shadows are sharper. Now, if I switch this mode off, this is real time. So again, I have real time and then I have path trace. Real time, path trace. Now, both of them has their advantage and disadvantage, right? But at least there is an opportunity to do path tracing. Now, in a nutshell, real time is quick. Path tracing, you have to wait a little bit to get it done. Path tracing can look much more realistic, but how you put it, reality might represent itself in ways that you don't like, for example. So for example, like you might like the fact that the shadow is very soft, but then when you do path trace, the shadow is very hard. You might like the fact that the lighting looks a little bit different, or the water looks clear, but then when you do the path tracing, it looks different as well. So you're not gonna, it's not advised that you use both methods. You have to decide that, all right, I'm going to render up my pictures using path tracing, because you have to literally set up your entire scene depending on which mode you're going to use. And it's really two different setups. So usually once you have your scene this far, now it's time to make a decision. Am I going to render out images using the real time, which is what you see is what you get? Or am I going to switch to the path tracer, which gives me, you know, more accurate reflections, more accurate shadows, but then it does some things differently that you may or may not like. Now, path tracing is the better way, so to speak, because it's more accurate, but it also may be a little bit more work. So let's try and set this up first, and let's get out some images using the real-time method. And another point is that the path tracing requires more system resources, because every time you click the path tracer, the computer is rendering. So you have to just sit and wait for it to render, and then bam, it finished render. All right. So before we do the path tracing way, let's look at some options to do with rendering. Now, if I look in my settings here, you notice that there is even a render tab. There is lighting and there is weather. As it relates to lighting, of course, we can change things like the environment, the exposure of the sun. So for example, you know, things can get really dark, or we can make things get really bright, right? So we can change the exposure of the sun. And each of these options here have a more beside it. So for example, I can change the white balance. So do I want the scene to look more warm or more cold? All right, so that would be the white balance there. I can change the intensity of the sun. All right, so the sun can be more like really bright or really like normal. Now, when you change the intensity, you might notice things look a little weird, like it's not really changing. And that is because exposure has a thing called auto exposure. So what do I mean by auto exposure? Well, when I go inside this building, it looks just as bright as outside. And that's because auto exposure is brightening the areas for me. So if I turn off auto exposure, everything kind of looks darker. And let's turn on auto exposure. Notice that it gets bright. So notice that, let's give you an example. If you look up in this corner here, it looks very dark, but as soon as I go closer to it, everything brightens up. And that's because the auto exposure is working in the background. It's just balancing everything for me so that I see bright areas and dark areas, and it's trying to do its best. Now, once I turn that off, that means that I have to manually set the exposure. So if that is the exposure that I want, it will not change. If I go underneath the building, it won't get any brighter. If I go inside the building, it's not going to get any brighter. But if I have auto exposure on, let's put this back down to 0. Then when I go like underneath the building, it will brighten the scene for me because underneath the building will be darker. So that may be a good or bad thing for you. But usually I would turn it off so that I can manually control how I want the auto exposure to be. Now, there is also, if I go back to lighting, there's also the environment. So I can have a dynamic environment. So what do I mean by that? Well, or I can have a sky HDR or a backdrop HDR, right? So a dynamic environment is kind of like a game environment, right? Where, for example, I can go to settings here, I can go to location, and I can change the time of day on the fly, like dynamically, real time. So I can just change the time of day. I can change the north, and that will change the north there. I can change the seasons, all right? And everything will update in real time, right? So that is a dynamic environment. The disadvantage with dynamic environment is that things look a little, the right word for it is gaming, right? It kind of looks like a game. So for example, shadows look like shadows, but for example, okay, if you look closely, look at how the tree shadows are. You can kind of see where some of them looks sharp and others look blurry, sharp. But then when you move around, you know, they kind of get a little funny and fuzzy. And if you go really far, then some of the shadows disappear. Other little things like the reflections look a little bit different. So for example, if I can, you know, these reflections aren't necessarily accurate, but it kind of looks like a reflection, but it's not exactly correct. So mostly the external lighting, when you use a dynamic sky, is going to kind of act like a video game. Now you can choose a HDR sky, and when you click that, it's going to kind of change up your scene a little bit. I'll just wait a while for it to load, and it looks a little different. And let's see here. Let's go back here. Right. Now, when you go to more, the environment is being lit by an invisible dome that is placed over the scene. So if you look up in the sky, you notice that you see real clouds, you see a sun. Now you're not able to change the time of day anymore because what you're looking on is a photograph of a sky, which makes it sky look more real, and you get more accurate global illumination, right? You can rotate the sky, but you can't really change the angle of the sun because you're looking on a photograph, right? Now you can also choose other skies there. So for example, if I go to HDR environments and go to skies, and I can go to a morning and afternoon sun. Let's go to a cloudy day, and you will see a whole bunch of skies that you can pick from. So even though you now have a sky that is static and that the sun isn't really moving, but you have many different skies that you can choose from. So for example, if I choose a clear morning, I could choose like this one here. I could click download to get it. And you have to be signed in Epic Games to access these. And I'll drag that here and give it a while to load. Now, once it loads, it's going to change the environment, and it's also going to change your lighting a bit. There we go. It has also changed my sun angle. Notice the sun is now coming from over there, so therefore all the shadows are going to be coming from over there. All right, so it does add a different kind of hue, a different kind of tone or feel to the scene, right? So that is the that is the dynamic sky. Now the HDR backdrop takes it another step further, where it gives you a photograph along with a sky, because this one is just a sky. So the HDR backdrop, and I'm hoping I can show you this, literally gives you a dome in which you live in. So for example, you can kind of see this dome here. That's the HDR backdrop. So it's like it's putting your world in a bubble, not just with sky, but also with background. And you can change the size of this backdrop. You can change the size of it. So it's like your own world, so to speak. And you have different types. So you can change the height offset. So this is the height of that dome. Right, so you're looking in the distance, but you know, this is a picture. So it's like it's putting your environment in a globe. I can make this bigger. So it's literally a globe. You can kind of see it now include the sailboat there. And then there are different globes that you can pick from. So if I go into my library and I go into outdoors, and remember, this is loading from the internet, so you're going to want to be on a decent connection. There it goes. So these are all the backdrops. Now in a lot of cases, some of these may not work because, you know, this is like putting your scene in an entire photograph. Like, let's try this one, for example. Let's download this one. And these are also a lot bigger, so they'll take a little longer to download. So for example, if you're building a city and using a HDR backdrop, it would be a little bit weird because you're literally living in a globe, so to speak, right? So let's see what this one here looks like. All right. It's a good idea to also save whenever you're swapping these out, because it does put your computer under a bit of strain. So this is this backdrop here. And if I zoom all the way out, you can see the bubble. So that is that bubble there. So it's like the entire scene is in this bubble. And the lighting for this scene is all extracted from that image. So it's like an actual image of somewhere that exists. So in some cases it does work, and in others it doesn't. But it is a photograph, so it looks real. But you know, whatever you get, you have to kind of work with it. So those are the different backdrops. Now let's switch back to dynamic. So this is dynamic, where you have no backdrop and everything is like kind of like a video game. Now when you're going to rendering, the first thing you want to do is you don't want to choose all of these options yet. You don't want to choose your intensity and your dynamic backdrop and all of these things. The first thing you want to do is to set up your scene, your view. Like, what are the views that I'm going to be rendering? Now, Twinmotion has a kind of specific way that is done. So if you click on image here, it's going to ask you to create your first image. Now, this is going to catch a lot of us, because when you click this, notice these black bars that come on top, right? This is very important. This means that you are inside this image, setting up this image. You're setting up the angle, you're setting up the view, and you are literally inside that image. So let's call this image, we're going to rename it by clicking the little three dots here. I'm going to rename, and we're going to call this view from pond. So I am inside this view. Now every setting that I change in the program will only be changed for this view, right? And let me show you what I mean by that. So let's say that I'm trying to decide how I'm going to take this shot, right? So I say to myself that for this image, I'm going to go to more. I want to change my lighting to a HDR backdrop, and I want this HDR backdrop to be I want the size to be bigger. I want to adjust the projection height. So what's to be there? Adjust the offset so that it's like that. And let's also adjust the rotation. So let's see. Yeah, let's have the sun coming from like over there. Or maybe not. Let's go back to that option there. Let's go back here. Let's go back to let's go back to lighting. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now let's say that I will also want to change my ambient light to be a bit brighter, and I can change my sun intensity. And let's change the white balance to be more orange. Now, all of these settings I'm changing here is for this image. So I'm going to click up, refresh. Now, this is the part that most people forget to click. You need to click update, and that is this image. Now, if I come out of this mode, I'm gone back to what my scene was prior, right? So all of those settings and everything that I have just changed was just for this image. And that's great because I can have completely different images set up. So I can create a next image here. And for this image, I can say that, all right, let's go to more. And for this image, I want to use a sky backdrop. And let's choose a sky that I want to use. So let's go to skies. Let's go to a noon cloudy sky. So this is in the middle of the day, basically, with a cloudy sky. Oh, so I need to download this first. And then I need to drag it here. And then I need to wait a bit. And everything that I'm changing here is just for image 2, right? So notice that I got a cloudy sky now. So remember, this is a photo of a sky, so that makes it look really real. It totally changes my scene. I can change the rotation of this. Remember, this is close to a midday sun. I can change the intensity of that sky. Let's go back to lighting. I can change the ambience a bit. All right, and that's it. So I'm going to choose refresh. So now I have two completely different scenes. I have this scene here, and everything about this scene is saved in this picture. And then I have this scene here, and everything about this scene is saved here, right? Which is great because in this scene, I may want to maybe put this over here like that. And to get that nice view like that. Now, in the scene, it will only change my rendering options. So notice how I move this boat here, but in both scenes, the boat is the same. But for example, if I change my view, so let's say that in this scene here, I want to go to more and I want to change my camera. I want to change my focal length to be like 25. I want to be further down on the ocean like that. And I want this to be a parallel. I want parallelism to be on. So that means all of my verticals are straight. Let's put on some depth of field where I can change my depth of field distance. So for example, I can have things in the background be blurry. Things that are way further in the background be blurry. All right. And then I'm going to refresh this image. Now, this image, on the other hand, I might want to have a view like, maybe I want to have a view like here. That kind of shows a more intimate sunset kind of shot. So let's go into here and go to camera. And let's say that I want this to be at 50 focal length. Then for this one, I might want to also change my format. So maybe I want my my size to be custom, so that I have a square image, 1080 by 1080. So I have a complete square image. It's looking a little dark, so let me go into my lighting and increase. Let me turn off exposure, auto exposure, and adjust this by myself here. Let's adjust my ambient light a little bit and change the sun intensity. Got it brighter, and change the white balance to be more like an evening sun. Now all of those settings, I can just update this here. So now I have two completely different views, one in the daytime where it's totally different, and one at the evening. But if I exit, I'm back to my default, right? So I have all of those settings saved in my views, and that is really how you kind of set up your rendered images here, right? Now the last thing I'll leave you with is going to be rendering with the path tracer. So those of you who have a computer that is powerful enough can get more accurate renders with this one. Now for the path tracer, when you're setting up your lighting, you're going to always want to have it on, right? So because things look a little different with the path tracer, it's going to be hard for you to have the path tracer off while you are rendering, right? So let's say that I'm in the path tracing tool now, and let's see, I'm gonna kind of have a view like this. Now the first thing I want to change with the path tracer is, well, let's change the lighting a little bit here. Let's see. I'm gonna change my lens. Oh, so let me create a new image. Okay, so I need to remember, let's come out of this here. Now I want, notice that this image here has this little thing here, which is saying that this image is done with a path tracer and this one is not. So when I go in this image here, the path tracer is on. When I go back here, it is just a real-time scene. Now in the path tracer image, I'm going to go to more, and let's try and set this up now. So I'm going to change this to maybe 25. Yeah, let's take a shot like this. Let's go a little bit farther with the path tracer tool. Let's go like that. Then I'm probably going to want to change my backdrop. So let's go to lighting. Let's change the backdrop from dynamic sky to let's try the HDR backdrop. Let's see if we can find one that works for our purposes. So let's go to outdoor. And let us try, let's see. This one looks This one looks pretty interesting. I mean, there is so much to choose from. What about this one? This one looks pretty good. We probably just want one that is a bit empty. Start back from the beginning and work our way down. All right, let's try this one here. So let me download this. And remember, the HDRs are gonna take a little longer to download than the skies. They are gonna be pretty big. And you can even add your own HDR image if you want. All right, so let us go to more and let's drag that in. Let's see how this one works out. Now, the trick with the HDR is that you have to change your lens to match how the HDR was taken, or is this going to look weird? So for example, this shot here looks weird because the HDR, like you can see the HDR is just way bigger than the shot. Like these trees are way bigger than this shot. Plus some are like trees and they're more far away. So I think this HDR would look a little bit nicer. So let's try this one. It's kind of like summer and then you're trying to use a winter background with summer trees. It's just not going to match. So usually when you're working with the path tracer, you want to work with your HDR as much as possible. That is how you take advantage of it, right? You just get more realistic lighting and reflections, but at the price of, it takes a little longer to render. You have to actually wait for it to render versus it being real time. Plus, you also have to match the views to your HDR background, where you can clearly see that this background doesn't match here. So you're going to have to, it's going to be a kind of a trial and error to find the perfect HDR that matches with your background. So let's see if this background works for this shot. And let's just adjust our view so that it can work. All right, so this is this background here. Now, we need to probably adjust this. So let's adjust the projection offset. So it's kind of like that. Let's rotate it to see if we find, I think this, let's go around. Maybe that matches a bit more. But the sun is right behind us. It's so tricky with these HDR images because this one kind of works. But the thing about it, see, the background isn't doing anything here. It's here. So, as I say, you have to try a little harder to find a shot that works at the angle, at the sun angle that you want. So this angle works for the background, but not for the sun. If we don't want the sun to be directly behind us. So let's see, maybe maybe a shot like this can work. Let's see. I think the shot has to be a little bit more tighter. And let's adjust our camera a little bit more. So let's probably go with a 30mm camera. Adjust the projection offset so that it's a bit taller. Just the ground offset, so let's want to rotate it a little bit more. Okay. All right. So the next thing that we perhaps now the other thing that we need to be doing, we probably need to fill out some of these areas here with more trees, more better looking trees. We need to fix the water, and this is the trick when you're using the path tracer. The water kind of looks a little weird, and the best way that you can work around this is to change your material for the water. So for example, in my case, what I would do is oh no, I've lost those settings. All right, I need to remember to choose update every time so I don't lose those settings. Okay, so what I would do is for the base, okay, let's turn this off a little bit. For the water, I would probably duplicate this. So I'm making a copy. So I have two. I turn off one of them. Because this water doesn't work well with the path tracer. It just looks weird. So the best water, I mean, this water is moving, so that's great for animation. But the path tracer, you're not doing animation, you're doing images. So a nice trick you can use is actually to use glass, like a flower pattern glass, and you get very similar water. Now, of course, it's not moving, but that's fine because when you have the path tracer on, you are not trying to do moving water, you're trying to do still water. So this is just a regular material. I mean, this looks weird, but it looks better than the kind of weird water. What you can do, you can change the scale of it. You can change the power of the bump. You can change the color of it slightly. Then you can change the opacity. Just carry the bump all the way down like that. You can change the reflection. So let's turn down the reflection a little bit. There we go. So it does look much nicer. I mean, this is a glass material and you've just basically tweaked the glass material. So the image here. So this is a kind of trick. If you are using the the path tracer, then that's fine. But if you're not using the path tracer, then you want to be using this water here, right? So that is one trick that you can use here. And the great thing is that, see, the materials are saved, which is great. So when I'm in this view, it uses, you know, this water, which is fine. But once I'm using the path tracer, it would use this water, which is fine, right? Now, some other little things, the path tracer does give you better reflections. So you see better reflections in the mirror and that kind of stuff. In here, it looks a little weird because there's no light in there. So when you're using the path tracer, you usually have to add more light, a little bit more light to your scene. So let's add some ambient light. Let's, you know, you're just, let's change the sun. You can change the sun size. No, I think that's kind of okay. Sun reflection is okay. So what I would change with this image now is maybe I would need to add some better trees in the background. I still think the backdrop would need to be changed a little bit more. And I think there is too much light hitting this surface here. So, and that's the kind of trick when you're doing the path tracer. You have to find a background here that kind of works with what you're trying to show, because that will kind of make or break your image. So that's pretty much it with in terms of rendering in Twinmotion. I mean, this is just kind of scratching the surface. Wait a minute, this water. Okay, yes, this water is set. Okay, but I'm just checking. Right, that's the old water. Right. So this is so once I have these three images set up, then what I need to go to is to export, which is the final step here. And when I go to image, I just need to add all of these images. Then I choose start export, and it will export these images for me. By the way, before you export any images, always save, because that is when your computer is most likely to crash when you are about to export your images. So please save. And you know, the more things you add to your scene is the bigger it's going to be. So notice that it's taking a little longer to save now. Probably because of those HDR backdrops that we downloaded. It's making the file a little bit more heavy. All right, then what we can do is kind of beef up the quality of the render. We can put this to medium, which is going to take much. No, we can leave it on high actually. And then we're going to choose export here. And then I'm going to choose this folder here, and we're going to export our images to this folder, and then we're going to wait. And this should be done pretty quickly. But the third image is going to be using the path tracer. So you're going to notice that your computer is going to freeze, which for a little bit, depending on the power of your computer. And if you take a look on your task manager, you'll notice that your GPU is really working overtime when it comes to using Twinmotion, right? All right, so now those images are produced. So if I look in that folder there now, then we will see the images that were produced. So this is that first image there, and that is this other image there. So, and that's the last image there. So these are the images. Now, this one was done using the real-time render. And this one was done using the path tracer. Now, it's hard to kind of look, but if you look at this area that's in shade here, like this color, this here is just a little bit more accurate, you know, and little things that the path tracer is a little bit more accurate as it relates to reflections, how it does reflections. The real-time renderer doesn't really handle reflections so good, but you know, little things. We had to really work with the background to let it fit, and even though we worked with it, it still wasn't ideal because it kind of blew out the front of our building here. But our shadows are nice and sharp, but notice how the shadows in our real-time rendering are a little blurry. Some of them is sharp, but some of them are blurry. So, you know, it's kind of a pick your own poison kind of a thing. At the end of the day, the path tracer will look better, but you have to work harder to find the perfect background, the perfect shot. Whereas the real-time rendering will work with almost any shot, but it just won't look as realistic. But at the end of the day, when you look at both of these images, they are pretty much good to go. So that is really our tutorial. This is the third and final part of the rendering. So we looked at the modeling component of the building and adding materials. We looked on the environment and adding objects, and the last part of it we looked on rendering for images.